You are listening to a White Phosphorus Pictures podcast.
Broadcasting under the night sky from the edge of an undisclosed jungle on the Gulf of Mexico, I'm Christopher Garitano, your voice in the night. For the next hour, allow me to be your guide into the bizarre unknown, the fantastic macabre, and together we'll journey to that borderland between fiction and reality, a place beyond all rational explanation. We are now off to the witch. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another Off to the Witch newsletter. For those of you first tuning in to Off to the Witch, or if you're new to the show, the newsletter is our alternate version of the show. It occurs every other week. Originally, I had a guest every week, but it's been very busy with both finishing 2 documentaries and an additional network movie and a series of movies that are following that, that I am strapped for time. But I will continue the show, and it will continue to evolve and grow as I go forward. I have huge plans for Off to the Witch and enormous plans for White Phosphorus Pictures, and everything is coming to fruition. And we are beating the darkness of what's happened to us over the past 4 years. Wow. It's been 4 years since March of 2020. I was in New York City, and this wasn't long after Strange World finished its entire run on Travel Channel. And then following that, it was about to show again on Discovery Plus and then further around the world at different networks. But in March of 2020, I was at a meeting in New York City, and I had proposed 3 new shows, 2 of which were greenlit and ready to rock and roll and go forward. And as fate would have it, not only for myself, but millions of people around the world were severely affected by the pandemic and all mysteries surrounding it. So here we are 4 years later. It is now March of 2024, and those who survived are pressing forward. This newsletter was originally going to be titled The State of the World Address, and maybe I'll revisit it later. I'll say a few words about it now before we get into these spooky missing stories, which I'm eternally interested in and cautious of, especially when I go out camping myself. But before I get to that, I want to talk a little bit about what's going on in the world, and I brought that up. Pressing forward is important. Any oppressive forces in your life holding you back, you should be able to launch and move forward from. Anything that is holding you back, put in your rear view. Never focus on negativity. Never focus on anything weighing you down. It was Friedrich Nietzsche that said, "Beware that when fighting monsters, you yourself do not become a monster, for when you gaze long into the abyss gazes also into you." And so whatever it is in your life, I would say don't spend too much time on it if it's something that even remotely irks you. Look forward, press forward. Life is too short. And don't hesitate to put everything you've got into achieving any dream you have, no matter what it is. Some of us have some very lofty goals. I've always had enormous goals. And luckily, somehow, I've been able to achieve quite a few of them so far, and without any special means. In other words, I wasn't born with a silver spoon in my mouth. I've had to work for everything. And I've never had great resources to achieve any of the things I've achieved. I mean, when I finally scored a couple of network projects, there was money behind it, and it was a huge collaboration. And this one going forward is the biggest one so far. However, the road getting there was always putting it forward. Was always working for months, if not years, to get these things going. And I defied anybody that was saying I had to do this, this, or that. There's always these armchair experts that try to tell you as you're, working towards these goals, what you should be doing. Well, from my own experience, don't listen to them. Do your own research. And if you're determined for this thing, whatever it is, and you should press for it. And for the most part, you should put everything you've got into it, because it's worth it. And you should romance the journey on the way there, no matter how difficult it is, no matter how many jobs you have to take while you're working towards that. I worked at a variety of jobs while I was making my first couple of documentaries. I romanced those jobs, everything from construction jobs, security, shooting local commercials, all kinds of things that I did. And I never once felt any less because my heroes did the same, like Charles Bukowski or, my favorite filmmakers were always working and putting time in, and they understood what they had to do, and they understood the journey. So whatever it is, it doesn't have to be filmmaking. It could be other things. Just be true to yourself, work hard, and don't forget why you're doing it. Be honest with yourself about whatever goal that is, whatever you're trying to achieve, if it's your true dream. If you're just trying to fit in with the Joneses or keep up with them, if you're just trying to be accepted into some kind of clique or some kind of group or community, I would say turn in the other direction and reevaluate your life. Look, I studied art. I've been an artist from the time of my birth. I've been interested in art and artistic people, and a lot of those people are individuals. They have, without it sounding too narrow, they have a very singular point of view. It's theirs, and it's forever evolving. And so those have always been my heroes. I cannot be part of some homogenous way of thinking. It doesn't work for me. And it doesn't work for most great people who have achieved things, visionaries in life. That's political parties. That's power trippers. Those are the people that try to gather you and make you think one way. And as cinema goes, I had recently watched, not for the first time, I read George Orwell's book, 1984. Orwell wrote that book in, I believe, a 2-year period on his deathbed. And I watched the motion picture again recently, and it blew my mind. Wow. To see that perhaps we're living the prequel to that story is terrifying. And a lot of the things that Orwell, you could say, predicted, everything from an oppressive government controlling the news, controlling what you ingest, what you wear, the way you think, the way you speak, editing history, destroying monuments. I mean, this has happened before in our human history, but Orwell was saying, if we do not learn from this history, we are doomed eternally to repeat it. As grim as that movie is, our main character, played by John Hurt in the motion picture, defies this reality that's being slammed on him and everyone else. And he is tortured. He's captured and tortured for it. Big Brother's watching him, and he is having a private romance. He is defying the rules that are set. And the hypocrisy of the government is there. Everything is there. But once he's being horribly tortured, Richard Burton is our main villainous leader of all of this oppression that's happening. And he explains to John Hurt's character at that moment that I'm going to erase you from all of history. It's not going to matter. No one's going to remember you. You'll be erased from all the records. It would be as if you've never existed. And Hurt turns around and tells him, it's no matter how long you do this for, no matter how much trouble you cause, no matter how much oppression you bring upon the human race, you will lose eventually, because it's people like you that always lose. That is the glimmer of hope left in Orwell's story, because it's such an oppressive tale and it's so grim and it doesn't end well. But John Hurt, in that moment, in his performance, is right. He knows that no matter what, eventually they're going to fail because they've never won permanently. It's always been a battle, and they've always tried. And unfortunately, I do believe that something very similar is happening right now. I can sit here and call out the hypocrisy of all political parties because it exists in all political parties. But here in the States, I watched, the State of the Union address. And there's, dare I say, Orwellian behavior happening. How they're trying to spin your reality, wow. If you're a staunch supporter of any particular political party, I ask you only just to step back and think for yourself for a moment. You are not betraying your party. You shouldn't even feel that way. That means you're not of your own brain. That means you don't think for yourself. Try to separate yourself from the narrative that's been forged for you. If you notice right now, I'm not telling you what to think. All I'm asking you to do is think for yourself. If you have this solid adhesion to any type of public way of thinking, if you sit and trust in some news anchor to tell you what to think, and I mean any of them, if you trust in a president, a governor, anything, please step back from all of it for a moment. Really think for yourself. If you're a little older, try to remember a time where this was lesser. This wasn't happening as much. It's been to an extreme, I would say, since 2020 and building upon us. However, a very wise man, an artist, a philosopher, a performer, a director, writer of poetry, so many things. Alejandro Jodorowsky, one of my favorite people, is still living. He's 96 years old, and he's a very wise man. He's like the living embodiment of Yoda, okay? No joke. He's a fantastic person. And he said not that long ago, I think it was last month, that he believes this year is going to be a rough one, but after, and in his words, we're going to see, 100 years of prosperity, maybe more. Man, I'm looking forward to that. I really am. And if you look throughout history, it's times like these that when the pendulum swings in the other direction, we're due for it. We really are. It's been a rough 4 years, let's just say alone. If you want to count all of the horrible things that have been happening around the world in the decades previous, it's been much longer than that. But particularly the last 4 years have been quite rough, and I think we're all due for some major relief. And you should question the leadership around the world right now. Question it all. Because it really belongs to us. We're in much greater number than they are. And we should have the say. And we can speak loudly with our vote. We can speak loudly with our silence. We can speak loudly with our wallets, proverbially. We can not buy their products. We can turn our backs on their, you fill in the blank. Because Big Brother is watching. And they certainly don't like sensible conversations. And I suppose I'll leave it at that for now. The official topic of tonight's newsletter revolves around the idea that there are reclusive strangers, mysterious wanderers, mountain men, so to speak, in our national parks and in our national forests. There are thousands and thousands of people who have gone missing mysteriously. There are cases of people falling, hiking, dehydration, hypothermia, animal attacks, suicides, and in other cases, foul play, but in the sense that it was planned, that someone was purposefully brought out into the woods by a boyfriend, a husband, someone who wanted to take them out and did. But there are a number of similarities in the cases of people who have gone missing and either vanished into thin air, seemingly, or bodies or body parts or skeletal remains have been found later. And there's a mystery to the configuration of what's found and what's completely disappeared. And I'm about to get into it. There's several cases I wanted to talk about. So I mentioned earlier my television series Strange World. One of the episodes, titled Without a Trace, we shot in Northern California, Mount Shasta. And, my interest from the beginning, because as these shows begin, they begin in the boardroom, and I pitched a variety of episodes, and they were interested in doing something on missing people. And originally, that particular episode was pitched to me by one of my co-producers. I had pitched 30 episodes, and the majority of the episodes that got greenlit for the first season were my pitches. But the missing episode, I was always interested in this stuff. However, it was suggested that, we come up with ideas for something like this. And there was a series of very popular books by David Paulides. And I mean, if you were to choose the most well-known or prominent researcher on the subject, it would be him. And for the first time, I was really, I knew of all this stuff, and I read snippets here and there, and I was told a story by my co-producer that was fascinating about a gentleman who had just run away from a film crew in Idaho and disappeared, vanished into thin air. He was behaving strangely for a moment and then just ran into the wilderness, just out of the blue. But one idea I'd like to talk about tonight, because there's so many opportunities for discussion on this subject matter. What really inspired me to talk about this tonight is that I was up late after doing a bunch of work, and I've seen this movie before. And if you haven't, you can check it out on Tubi. It's one of the platforms you can watch it for free on. But it's a creepy little movie from 1977 titled Rituals, and it's starring Hal Holbrook as one of the main characters. It's about 5 doctors who were on a camping trip, much like Deliverance in a way, except these are doctors. And they're interesting how they interact with each other, especially when they're injured and how they're trying to fix each other. But they go deep into the wilderness, and this is a getaway, an adventure. And someone is out there watching them. And I've always wondered, because you always, and I'm going to get into some of the details of some of these missing cases, thanks to David Paulides and a few really good news reports, that you always hear about the investigation. In other words, like in Paulides' investigation, or anybody else for that matter, there was a variety of people. They find the aftermath. They'll find what's missing, what's there. They'll talk to people. They'll interview who the person was with before they disappeared, days before, moments before, whatever it may be. But in the case of Rituals, it really, had the wheels spinning in my imagination, is that I felt that was a fantastic example of what the people who eventually ended up missing went through. And again, my episode of Strange World, and this is the wrestling match that you have to have with paranormal programming when you're dealing with a network. And I brought something very original to the table in the beginning. I'm happy with how the show came out, but it really is an amalgam of my ideas mixed with a bunch of other people kind of getting into the soup, and it's something I had to deal with. Is that episode, I wanted to focus on what I'm about to talk about tonight, which I think was the most believable aspect, because I would look into this first before I would anything else. So in the episode of Strange World, and I'm going to leave the link so you can watch the Without a Trace episode, I would say 60% of it is me. The rest of it is an idea that we should have looked into Lemuria, the idea of this hidden city, this magical city underneath the mountain. I'm not scoffing at that wholeheartedly right now. It's a possibility. But I would have to, in my own right mind, rule out what I think is the most believable possibility. The most believable possibility is what happened to these characters in this fictitious film, Rituals. Now, the five doctors, it's really well directed. So the doctors are just having their own interactions. They're having a good time. They light a campfire. They're fishing. They're doing their thing, never expecting anything to happen to them. You go into the wilderness and you should be prepared to deal with the elements, okay? You should obviously have the basic needs of water and food, fire, emergency first aid, and then work your way through the fact that you are now in the animal's den, so to speak. You have creatures around you that can hurt you, and that would hurt you if they had the opportunity. Some of them, of course. Most of them are very elusive and scared of us more than we are of them. However, you could run into a situation where you might run into a big cat, a bear, in some cases wolves, coyotes, and in many of the missing cases, it is animals. Sometimes that, especially young children, that animals will attack children. But big cats go after adults, and so do bears, obviously. And there are many bear attacks on record. But in the case of Rituals, and I'm not really giving anything away because it's the theme of the night, there is a person. There's a person stalking that camp. There's some story conveniences, but it's still a great film. And the stalking is being, I won't give you the reasons and I won't give everything away, but this particular person is a very reclusive mountain man type and is watching these doctors, stalking their every move. One of the things, after they have their first little party the first night, it's dark, the fire's burning, they're scaring each other at the camp. Very intelligent conversations. That's one of the things I like the most about this movie is the actors are at the top of their games, in my opinion, is their conversations. It's what you would imagine some doctors on leave and how they would interact with each other. So I found that to be an excellent element of it. And then instead of just a bunch of stupid teens waiting to get killed. One of the things that happen is when they wake up the next morning, their boots are taken. Now, that's what rang the bell for me for tonight's newsletter and discussion, is that in many of the missing cases, a similarity that's been found is that their boots, their shoes or sneakers are missing. And it's an odd situation because it's as if something for sure took the boots off. And in those cases, a lot of those cases, the animals have been ruled out. So in other words, whereas like the jeans or the belt has been undone on the victim, when they did actually find the victim, they would have no shoes and the pants would be on backwards, as if something put the pants back on. Some very odd stuff. So I'll go over a couple of these with you. Okay, so this is from David Paulides' book, Missing 411. This is the very first one. And I encourage you to pick up this book first and work your way through them. These are fantastic accounts. And we, our original episode, and again, the link will be in the description for you to watch it. We were supposed to have David Paulides on the show, and I guess scheduling it just didn't work out at the time. So we continued to just look into this. Now we spoke to search and rescue. We spoke to witnesses. We spoke to relatives. It was an honest investigation. And eventually, these things have to be edited. But the footage that was shot and the journey that I took was sincere. I actually sat down with these people. I talked to the families of the missing persons, talk to law enforcement, talk to search and rescue. You'll see all of that in the episode, but keep in mind, for those of you not in the know on how these things are made, we shot 1,000 hours for an 8-hour series. So there's a lot missing, much like these people. Okay, so one of the cases that has that similarity to the motion picture Rituals. And once again, you can watch Rituals on Tubi for free. It's there's probably a couple of movies called Rituals, so look up the one from 1977 with Hal Holbrook and Lawrence Dane. So this is the missing case of Charles McCullough. And he went missing on October 14th, 1976 in Crater Lake National Park. Eventually his body was found. He was 19 years old at the time. Okay, and so Paulides wrote, "The disappearance of Charles McCullough is as unnerving as the finding of his skeletal remains. Official documents and facts surrounding the case were extremely difficult to find. I submitted a series of FOIA requests to the NPS over several months. The official response from Charles Wilson of NPS in Denver states that they have lost all reports related to the incident. They claim that the park did not have the space to maintain these files, so they were destroyed. I asked if the regional officer or NPS headquarters, and NPS is National Park Service, by the way, in Washington, D.C. had copies, and they said no, those were missing as well. An organization called the Crater Lake Institute maintains a website that highlights the unusual incidents that have happened in and around the lake. It was also through this site that I learned the names of park rangers who responded to this incident. A FOIA request submitted to the FBI did produce 50 pages of documents that were forwarded to me. Inside the papers was a series of letters written by Charles McCullough's father, requesting that the FBI become involved in his son's disappearance. When the FBI stated that they couldn't join the investigation, Mr. McCullough wrote letters to Harry Byrd, requesting that the Congress intervene. Mr. McCullough was convinced beyond any doubt that his son had been abducted and taken against his will, and he may have been correct. And so Paulides further writes, "The story you're about to read was gleaned from reviewing FOIA documents, newspaper clippings, and interviews with NPS personnel. Charles Wesley McCullough left his Virginia home on January 8, 1975, on the trip of a lifetime. He was going to travel the NPS system and photograph the splendor of our national parks. He was a very reliable and punctual son. He would routinely call his parents and explain where he was and the itinerary he would follow. He made calls to his parents on January 16th and the 22nd from Yuma, Arizona. The last call to his parents would be received on January 27th, 1975, while Charles was at a friend's residence in Eugene, Oregon. On January 29th, Charles told his friend that he was going to travel to Crater Lake to photograph the park in its winter element. He said he would return by the 31st, and that if he wasn't back on February 1st, call the police. This was the last time that his friend ever saw Charles." I think what's most frustrating about a lot of these cases is that perhaps the National Park Services, and especially at that time, 1976, wanted to close a case. I know it's difficult for people to want to understand that or believe that, but human beings in these situations get exhausted and they want to simply tidy up a case. They simply want to shut it down and say, well, this is what happened. Since Charles's body was found, they officially on record wrote that he died of natural causes. Well, natural causes, 19 years old. I guess they were suggesting the elements killed him. But there are other things that suggest that it was much more than that. And one of them is that his shoes were taken. You can rule out an animal doing this. You can rule out a lot of things. In this case, his shoes were taken. Well, you can say, well, he took his shoes off, threw them somewhere. Okay. Now, does that happen with everybody that goes missing? Because there are hundreds and hundreds of cases of people having their shoes taken off. So David wrote, "I don't profess to be a conspiracy theorist, but I do find it almost unbelievable that both Charles McCullough and B.B. Bukowski simply disappeared from the Crater Lake perimeter. Both were photographers. Storms hit the area immediately after each went missing, and the NPS has lost all reports of Charles's disappearance. Yes, the pathologist did make a determination that Charles died of natural causes, but that is only an educated guess based on no visible injuries to the skull. Here are the questions I want you to ponder, he writes. Where are Charles's boots? Boots are heavy. They don't blow away in the wind. Where is the camera and knife carried on his hip that were supposed to be with Charles? Where is the coat that Charles was supposed to be wearing? Why would Charles's pants and belt buckle be undone? If Charles did die at the spot where his pants were recovered, why was there only one broken bone in the right pant leg? Where were the left leg bones and femur of the right leg and hip bones? The pants weren't ripped to shreds as if a bear had gone for the meat of the leg. It was like he melted into those pants. The pants were found intact. How could an animal have consumed Charles without tearing the pants to shreds to get to the meat? Charles's father was adamant with law enforcement that he felt his son was taken against his will, and because of those feelings wanted the FBI to investigate the case. And if you watch the motion picture Rituals, what was happening to Charles during that time? You know, I know there are many people that believe people can just vanish into thin air, and perhaps they can. My propensity is to look into this further and think about a logical explanation. There are a lot of reclusive mountain men, even to this very moment. That was 1976, so I would say there were probably quite a few more at that time. But the reclusive nature is something inherent in the human being, so that's never going to go away as long as we have these national parks. As long as we have forests and as long as we have remote areas, you are going to have reclusive humans that flee to those areas, and not all of them are good people.
After these messages, we'll be right back.
If you go down in the woods today, you're sure of a big surprise.
If you go down in the woods today, you're sure of a big surprise.
This animal has only been dead for a couple of hours.
Look, Harry, somebody's playing a very sick game with us, and I want to know who, and I want to know why.
If you go down in the woods today, you better go in disguise.
April's dead, Harry.
Was it a man?
For every bear that ever there was will gather there for certain because today's the day the teddy bears have their picnic.
We're in the middle of nowhere, Mitzi. No one's gonna help us.
Why? What is it happening to us?
Somebody has stolen the boots!
Why would anyone steal 5 pairs of boots?
Get off it, DJ.
Look! 2 months ago, I sent everyone Xerox sheets of what I would supply and what you were to bring. You were to bring extra shoes and your toothbrushes. I supplied everything else.
5 doctors on their annual ritual, just trying to have a good time. But this is the year they should have stayed at home.
That thing's never gonna let us out of here.
For every bear that ever there was will gather there for certain because today's the day the teddy bears have their picnic.
Rituals isn't a picnic. You're in for a big surprise.
This series presents information based in part on theory and conjecture. The producer's purpose is to suggest some possible explanations, but not necessarily the only ones, to the mysteries we will examine.
It's not just limited to these 411 books. They're fantastic, and David Paulides has inspired an entire generation to look into these cases. And I think that was his goal, because these cases were completely dormant. They were shut down. Nobody wanted anything to do with them. And so he should be praised for his investigative work. I think that's the whole point. He wants us to talk about them. The families want us to talk about them. I spoke to families personally while making the episode of Strange World, and that's all they have. Rarely do you run into a group of people who don't want to participate. In other words, a family of somebody who's gone missing. They need you to. So I personally encourage as many of these as possible. Here's a story that was published much later in February 17th, 2012. And I know this made it across several different very popular papers, but this is from the Everett, Washington Herald. And the title of this article is Reclusive Mountain Man Plagues Vacation Cabin Owners. Salt Lake City. He's eluded authorities for more than 5 years, a mountain man who roams the wilderness of southern Utah, breaking into remote cabins in winter, living in luxury off hot food, alcohol, and coffee before stealing provisions and vanishing into the woods. Investigators have clawed for clues, scouring cabins for fingerprints that matched no one, and chasing reports of brief encounters only to come up short, always a step behind the mysterious recluse. They've found abandoned camps, dozens of guns, high-end outdoor gear stolen from homes, and trash strewn around the forest floor. But the man authorities say is armed and dangerous and responsible for more than 24 burglaries has continued to outrun the law across a swath of mountains not far from Zion National Park. He's roamed across 1,000 square miles of rugged wilderness where snow can pile 10 feet deep in winter. And while there have been no violent confrontations, detectives say he's a time bomb. Lately, he's been leaving the cabins in disarray and riddled with bullets after defacing religious icons. And a recent note left behind in one cabin warned, "Get off my mountain." Now, if that doesn't convince you that there are dangerous recluses out there, and it's human nature. Well, this guy's a loose cannon, but and you certainly wouldn't want to run into him in the wilderness. But there are others, and there have been others. And I think it's an incredible story to contemplate the details of what happens in the time of the victim. Again, we try to find these clues to piece everything together, and most of these will remain a mystery. You'll find things that will continue to baffle you, like, why were the shoes missing? Forensics can prove time of death, but then how did their body travel 300 yards from the place where they died, And then, of course, somebody's going to try and brush this off and say, well, it was an animal. An animal did this. But there's no evidence of an animal doing these things. And if you look into Paulides' work, there are murders, even though they're just as baffling as the Charles McCullough story. It's been proven that these people were bludgeoned, that it didn't happen from just someone falling from the rocks. However, the National Park Service, once again, just buries these reports. And I think the most important thing in his work is that he's revealing that these cases are so numerous and terrifying in the sense that there is something out there. There is someone out there. Now, I have to talk about what many people keep saying it is, as if they know, is that they say it's a Bigfoot, it's a dog man, okay, that's a possibility. However, it's more of a possibility that the gentleman I just talked about in Utah, people like him are doing this thing. So there's one story that truly confirms once again that there are perhaps psychotic, reclusive mountain men out in the middle of nowhere in these parks, in these forests. I'll get into a couple more scenarios after this, but I've talked about the story of Cheryl Powell a couple of times, and I first learned of this story when it happened. I urged my colleagues while making Strange World that if we were going to do the missing episode, that we should focus on the fact that most likely a good majority of these baffling cases, right, ones that we haven't been able to figure out, that this could be the result of a reclusive mountain man, not unlike the character waiting in the woods in not only Rituals but other movies like The Hills Have Eyes, or another kind of schlocky horror film but has its terrifying moments that can also be seen on Tubi called The Prey. When I was a kid, these movies scared the hell out of me. And, I lived by the woods, but not a vast forest. I'd have to go upstate New York for that. But there were woods all around me, and I had to travel through the woods to get to, a buddy's house or whatever. And of course, my head was filled with these horror films. After reading a lot of these accounts, and the one I'm about to read to you, is that I truly believe that the weirdest drive-in horror slasher film is actually reality. In fact, reality is probably 10 times more horrifying than anything we can put on the screen. Unfortunately, in these cases, we go to these movies to have a good time, to like a roller coaster ride. That's what a horror film is. We have this cathartic experience. We have this community experience. Everybody's in the theater together having a great time. You're yelling at the screen, trying to tell somebody to do the right thing to get away. And hopefully they'll get away, but a lot of people don't, even in the movies. In the case of these missing people, obviously they didn't get away. They weren't the lucky ones. However, there's the story of Cheryl Powell. Now, I've talked about this before, and I learned about Cheryl Powell the summer that it actually occurred, that she was found. And let me read this. This is an article from the New York Post. Hiker found days after vanishing claims knife-wielding man chased her. Okay, now I'm going to read you the details. A California hiker and her dog were found safe this week after they vanished into the woods for 4 days. 4 days Cheryl Powell was gone. And the woman claims she'd been chased by a man with a knife, according to a new report. Cheryl Powell, 60 years old, disappeared Friday near the Grandview Campground in the Bristlecone Pine Forest area that's in California. The Inyo County Sheriff's Office said in a statement, Powell took their 5-pound black and white dog Miley for a walk after she and her husband selected a campsite, police said. When her husband, who was moving his car at the time, got out, his wife and Miley were nowhere to be found, so he alerted the cops using his satellite device. Several law enforcement and search and rescue organizations combed the area through the weekend for Powell, who is described as an experienced hiker, but to no avail. Then on Monday, they found her in an extremely remote area, using aerial reconnaissance and thermal imaging, police said. Miley was found about 2.5 miles from where Powell went missing, authorities said. Powell, who was transported to a local hospital for medical clearance, was resilient and strong but exhausted. But she had a story to tell. She told family that she strayed away when a knife-wielding man who appeared to have been hiding out in the area went after her down a hill, according to the report. Powell thought the man was chasing her. She managed to find water and a cactus to eat, but after a while could no longer walk. She's now recovering and expected to be released from the hospital in a few days. I would say in Cheryl Powell's case, she is one of the luckiest. If the knife-wielding man chased her down the hill in the middle of nowhere, out of the thousands and thousands that go missing in these parks, the knife-wielding man catches somebody every now and then. And I think many of these cases are unfortunately the result of these reclusive types that are out there. And I guess a word to the wise, I know many of you that listen love to camp and love to go on these excursions, searching for clues to find Bigfoot. I mean, what a horror movie it would be. Let's say I'll set up a scenario for you. 5 Bigfoot investigators, right? Go on a weekend camping trip. And they don't find Bigfoot, most likely. What they do find is something much darker, something much more calculating, and something that's watching them while they're out there investigating this elusive, legendary beast. And that could be your story. So how does one prevent this from happening? And that is not a far-fetched scenario. In the motion picture Rituals, and it is a movie, it is fiction. However, I think it shows you how 5 very intelligent men, surgeons, could be overwhelmed by one person. Because number one, the element is you're not expecting it. I mean, most of you that go out and look for Bigfoot aren't expecting to even find a Bigfoot. You're hoping, but I think most likely the odds are against you. The odds are much higher that there's someone out there watching you, that there's someone waiting for you in many cases, or in others that you're trespassing. A person that would do something like this, if you think about the type, they're outside of society. They've completely removed themselves from everything, and they want to be alone. But also, I think some predators know that this is a great hunting ground, because it's very easy to see. I mean, simply scouring through, if you do any kind of wilderness or camping search on Instagram, well, you get a good idea of who's out there. And in a lot of cases, it's younger people, vulnerable people. They're having the time of their lives, and they're looking for the next best photo to show up on Instagram. However, predators can be using Instagram as a catalog, because you're citing exactly where you are, where you go. They can learn your history. They know they're more like you, and they'll wait for you. They'll wait for people like you to show up, because it's a popular thing to do, and it's easy to gauge just by the math of everything that you're a sitting duck. Well, first, to prevent these things, I would say bring people with you. Be prepared for all of the elements first. Let's rule out any cryptozoological monster first, and protect yourselves from the elements, the animals, the wildlife. Be prepared in case you get injured. First aid. Think of every scenario. And then elevate the next stage of this to the fact that there could be somebody out there watching you. And they might make their move. In the case of Cheryl Powell, she got really lucky. She got away. But these other people didn't. And read Missing 411. Get that first book. I believe it's at a reasonable price on David Paulides' website. And I encourage you to read those stories. It might help you if you're an outdoors person. There was a man who was very well equipped to go to the wilderness in Alaska. His name was Richard Dick Prenicky. And there was a documentary that he mostly shot himself called Alone in the Wilderness. Fantastic stuff that he shot of himself. Now Prenicky entered the wilderness in his 50s. He was as strong as an ox when he went there. But he went in with survival skills, the skills of a carpenter. He was ex-military. He really knew his stuff. He knew how to survive. And he was totally equipped to survive in Alaska, no matter what. He was a hunter. He could do everything. He knew how to use the wilderness to his advantage. And I think he didn't come back officially, because he was in his 50s, decided, I'm going to build my own cabin. I'm going to live in the Alaskan wilderness, and I'm going to live off the land and do what I have to do. And he did it. And even built his own tools. It's amazing if you can find Alone in the Wilderness. I'm sure you probably can on YouTube somewhere. National Geographic. So Prenicky shot all this footage and brought it to National Geographic, and it was made into this documentary that eventually, in his 80s, I think, Prenicky finally said, all right, I'm going to come home. He did what he had to do. And that it's just so amazing, people like that, but they're equipped. And I think he'd also be equipped to deal with a predator, or perhaps a predator wouldn't even bother with him if they saw from a distance. But if they see these, young 20-somethings goofing off for Instagram and smiling for their cell phones, you are a sitting duck. I don't care what you think you know. you have to think like one of these people that are out there. So I offer these stories tonight and the variety of references for you to go and further look into this. Enjoy the horror films for what they are. They're certainly fun to watch, and perhaps they'll scare the hell out of you enough to make you reevaluate your wilderness trip. And for the experienced people out there, you should be careful too. Because ultimately, everybody in the woods considers all the other stuff. I guess at least the smart people would consider the elements, the animals, the fact that you might get injured if you're alone. However, rarely does anyone consider that there are these reclusive types out there. And obviously, evidence shows that they are out there in many cases. So read up on all this stuff if you plan to go out in the woods, and be careful out there. I'll include links in the description for everything I'm talking about, including the Strange World episode. I'm busy working on a movie right now for a network, and this is going to lead to several movies that follow. It's an exciting time, and my new docuseries is also coming together beautifully. And I'll keep you posted as to exactly when A Haunting We Will Go is going to be released. Right now, it's still in post-production, and I'm very happy with it. It's the best of its kind that I've made. I've made several shows for networks, and I've also made independent documentaries like Montauk Chronicles. And I am very happy with A Haunting We Will Go. I think it's my best work so far, and I'm grateful for everybody who participated. It was worth the time put into it, because I've had a lot of projects along the way, so it's not exactly 3 years of applied time. It's when I could work on it, and work on it often, but take my time with it, because to me, it's not about slapping these things out. I see a lot of paranormal documentaries being made, and frankly, none of them are very good at all. And so if I'm going to make more of these, and I am, I promise I'm going to make something special for you. I promise I'm making something that you're going to revisit. And it's certainly not going to be like everybody else's thing, because that's not what I do, and it's not what I'm interested in. So I'll leave that up to everyone else. There's some very talented people out there, and I'd say keep an eye out for them. Stop going back to the same old stuff. I mean, I know you want something exciting and something different. And there are glorious takes on mysteries and the supernatural, and they'll continue to come, because I know that one thing that I always wanted, even when I was way back in film school, was for motion pictures to be in the hands of the people, in the hands of great artists, because the greatest artists are not the ones that are being paraded in front of you. There's some fantastic filmmakers that are in Hollywood, so to speak, right? That are known. However, I think amongst the 8 billion people that are on the planet, there might be quite a few more you don't know about. And now the education and the equipment is in their hands. And I get quite disappointed to see people with all of this in their fingertips still making the same garbage over and over and over again. And I don't mean just paranormal stuff. I mean like motion pictures. It's in your hands now. Speak to the world. Learn history. Learn film history. Say something to the world. We need it right now. I didn't really do the state of the world address, but we're at an extraordinary place in history. You can embrace it and learn from it, and be careful, of course. But don't be a follower. This is not a time to be a follower. This is a time to open your mind, speak to each other. Do not get taken by pop culture right now. There's nothing to be taken by. The music is the underground. The movies, the artwork, everything that we love is the underground and the past. There's the greatest stuff made in the past. There are some fantastic movies being made through the Hollywood system. I mean, I'm doing something through the studio system now that everybody involved is so charged about. It has the potential to be a counterculture event, which gets me fired up for it. So you'll learn more about this a little further down the road, but it is happening and it's exciting, and I'll keep you informed, and Off to the Witch will continue and only grow and get greater. I'm going to get the word out, and if you enjoy the show, my steady listeners, spread the word around a little bit. There's going to be more to come with Off to the Witch. I'm going to expand the show, and I have big plans for it. So, but spread the word, share it with your friends, share it with the like minds. As you can see, I keep this show evolving. I try different things, and I think that's what we need to do. I'll always cover mysteries of the world, but I want to discuss these things in a unique way and be informative. And even the newsletters, I'll try different things with. So I really appreciate your company tonight, and thank you for joining me tonight and listening to some of these stories and listening to my rant about the world for a little bit. Get out there, be inspired, live your dreams. Don't let anyone tell you can't do it. I'm grateful for your company, and I'm grateful for you listening to the show. And I have to get back to work, so I will see you next time. Take care.